All right, that'll work. All right, folks. Isn't Ember.js dead? No, wrong thing to say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, I want to make a new Ember app. I want to call it Barkwire. And all right, so introduce myself a little bit. Mike Herman did such a good job talking about who and what I am, but really, I'm an educator, I'm a web app developer, and I'm a business dork. I am the faculty director for Galvanize WDI in Denver, and I also co-host this podcast, Sprint UX Podcast, sprintuxpodcast.com. Please check it out. So why on earth would anybody want to use Ember? Ember is for ambitious apps. If you want to make to-do lists, that kind of shit, look elsewhere. It's easier to do somewhere else. If you have that rare app that needs, routes, testing, components, build pipeline, all the things that make an app, Ember is your place. So this is also an anti-bike shedding tool. So if you've ever got an argument over something stupid, like whether or not to use grunt or gulp, all of those decisions are made for you in Ember. My favorite thing, developer ergonomics. So hopefully the thing you'll see the most in the live coding I'm going to do is how friendly this is to the developer, how badly it wants to help you make the app that you want to make. So the Denver Ember benefits are that we have a super fun meetup that we do every month. We have a very active community, and you get to hang out with us in Portland every year in March. Look at all the fun people, very, very small, but we're a lot bigger in person. Cool. So app is ready to go. So let's go into Barkwire. All right, so the first thing I want to do, let's set up a session here. So I'm going to say this is my server, that's my editor, and if I want to serve an Ember app, if I want to do my hello world, Ember S, and go over here to localhost 4200. And we get to see this amazing Hello World page made by David Baker, who's in the audience today. But even better than that, if I go over here to localhost 4200 tests, I have a test suite that's already wired up, ready to go. So let me split this guy real quick. If the first thing we need to do is we need to list all the dogs in the Barkwire API. So how about I make an acceptance test for that? We'll say, hey, Ember, give me an acceptance test called list dogs. And it made an acceptance test for me. So now if I hop over to this acceptance test that I made, I have a bunch of boilerplate ready to go, ready to write a test. So I want to see write a test for visiting dogs. If I go to the root URL on this website, I want the URL to be dogs. I want it to redirect to this list dogs route. So if I save that, saying, hey, I was expecting when I load the page that the URL would be dogs. It's not. It's just the root. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a route for it. I'm going to say, hey, give me a route called index. So it gives me a route called index. And if I hop over to that route that I just made, I can say, hey, when this route activates, I want you to transition to dogs. And then it goes, hey, there's no route called dogs. That's a solvable problem. Say, hey, give me a route called dogs. Sweet, all my tests are passing now. So that's not the only thing that I want this thing to do. I want to say, hey, I want you to find me the dogs on the page. This is going to be an unordered list. I want you to look at all those LIs, and I want you to assure me that there are 3 of these. It's saying, hey, there isn't 3, there's 0 dogs on the page. So if I hop over to the dogs route that I made and say, hey, give me a UL with the class of dogs, and give me some list items. Ah, shit, I got a passing test. So that seems like a good enough time to give ourselves a save point. And okay, cool. So now the next thing that I probably want to assure is that these dogs, you know, have something to them. So let's say the first one of these should be Charles Barkley. And it's saying, yo, dog, I don't see no Charles Barkley. Oops. Let me fix that. I see this function. Oh, cool, you invoked the function. Thank you very much. You got nothing in it. So now let's start building out what this thing is probably going to look like. We'll say, all right, in this LI, I'm going to have a section. Class is dog listing. And in that section, I want an H3 with, it'll have something like Charles Barkley in it. And then under that, I'm going to have another section. And inside of that section, I might have a figure. If you're going, hey, Kyle, what's a figure? I'm saying, hey, you know when you talk shit about people for writing HTML because it's such an easy baby language? Maybe you should actually check the spec and see how you're supposed to do images, motherfucker. Shit talk number 2. Woo! It's HTML. HTML is HTML is HTML. So while we do have a bunch of extra shit that we get out of handlebars and like the Ember specific handlebars, at its core, any valid HTML is valid Ember HTML. So we got that. We should also have a fig caption. And then after our figure, we should have some kind of description of our dog. Cool. So do my test pass now. Oh shit, my test pass. So let's give ourselves a save point. Sweet. So the next thing I want to do is see, I haven't even looked at the page yet. Let's see how all this looks. Oh no, I still got Baker's boilerplate in there, and I got all this sort of stuff. So let's go take care of that. This would be similar to a layout in Express, but I have this application template that's my wrapper around all this stuff. So I want a header. I want a footer. And then I want to wrap this outlet. That's where the stuff inside of that's going to render inside of main. And then let's give ourselves an H1. How about? Barkwire. So if I save that, hey, this is starting to look a little bit better now. You also notice that like I didn't have to refresh that page. All the live reload, all that like developer ergonomics kind of stuff, got that out of the box. Over here in footer, how about I have something like small for my legal text, and I say, oh, this is copyright Barkwire Incorporated, baby. And then one more thing, when I click on the header for this, I want to link back to the index. So since this is a single page application, I don't want to actually link to it with an anchor tag. I can do that if I wanted to actually break the application, go somewhere else. I have that choice. If it's inside the application, I probably want to do a link to. This will serve the same function as an anchor tag, renders that way, takes me to that page. So I'm going to link to the index anytime I click on that. All right, cool. So I got an app now. This looks like shit. And Mike was telling me we got the shared CSS file, right? But it's Sass. So I want to do is install a Sass preprocessor. Mind you, anybody who set like up an entire build pipeline from scratch, like it's not no work. But I get all of that for free if I say Ember install CLI Sass. And it's going to give me a Sass precompiler and wire it into my build pipeline. This particular style sheet also uses the Meyer reset. So after I get that guy in there, I'm going to add the Ember install Ember CLI Meyer reset Sass. And like this uses NPM under the hood, but it gets access to the build lifecycle of Ember, all kinds of other goodness. So the only thing I have to do to get Sass now is move the app CSS that they gave me to app.scss and reset the server, and I have some sass.
10 more minutes.
Shut up. So let's say I want to go over here into one of my bark wires and take the style sheet. Hey, there, I got a style sheet. Do I have an app? I got an app now. Pretty nice. So, next thing I want to do, have that looking pretty good. This data in here. So I could do something like repeat that 3 times, get rid of these guys, and like that's roughly how it's going to work. But the whole point of having SPA, we got an API, we got data, we got all kinds of cool stuff. So I'm going to abstract this one layer out to the dogs route. I'm going to say, hey, this template uses a model. And what it does is it returns these objects. Sweet. And just to make sure everything's wired up correctly still, I can say that first one, the one I'm testing for, that should say Charles Barkley. Does it in fact still say Charles Barkley? Did my test still pass? Oh, I got 5 of these things now. Oh, that's right, because I need to take the model that I was using and say, yo dog, how about you each over that shit? So for each object in that model, I want to say, we'll call that dog. And I want that to look like this. And now we don't need all this other stuff now. And instead of hard coding these things, let's take the dog and say, that's dog.name, that's dog.image URL. The alt text on this should be the name of the dog. Caption on this should be the image caption. And this should be the dog description. All right, so do I have passing tests now? Oh, baby, I got some passing tests, and Charles Barkley's still there. So let's give ourselves a save point. And sweet. So now that I have that dynamic data working, this thing that I'm repeating, that looks an awful lot like it should be a component. That should be a component, Kyle. I agree. So how about we make one? We'll say, hey, give me a component called dog listing. And not only did it give me all of the like JavaScript stuff I needed for that, it also gave me some tests. So if I look at this dog listing test, I can get rid of some of the boilerplate that it gave me and say, hey, if there exists such a thing in the environment as a dog, and it has these properties, a name of A, a description of B, a image URL of C, an image caption of D, and I render that dog component and pass that in, I should probably be able to do things like say, hey, if I look at the text of the H3 of that, it should say A. And if I look at the p tag in there, it should probably say B. And if I look at the image source, it should probably say C. And if I look at the fig caption, it should probably say D. So let's see what the tests say. Failing test? Oh no! So let's take a look at the component that it gave me. So if I say, this listing, if I just copy paste all this crap I have in here, say, let's call that a dog listing, that takes the dog, and under this, I'll give myself the dog listing. All right, hey, I got passing tests again. It's exactly what I want to see. So, all right, cool, good save point. So all of this is great, and I got this stuff showing up, but I'm not hitting the API yet. So this hard-coded data that I have over here, what if I give myself an actual model? I say, hey, Ember, give me a model for dog. And instead of that, I say, okay, this dog model is going to have 4 properties. So it has a name, which is a DS adder, and it's got a description. These are all just like plain properties. This is saying when the API gives me this back, this is what I should expect to see. So name, description, image URL, and image caption. Sweet, so I have a model now, and I need some way of getting this remote data that I have. So I'll say, give me a data adapter, give me something to look up this data, and that should be for the entire application. So it gives me that, and I say, hey, this application adapter, all of my API data can be found at barkwireapi.herokuapp.com. And this is not a JSON API, this is a REST API. Get all these cool goodies right out of the box. And so now, if I go to that model, I can say, hey, hey data store, find all dogs. And, oops, I need to return it. Hey, so it's like paragraph. Hey, look, I got all these buddies. Cool. So that seems like a pretty good time to deploy. So if I say, cool, that's working. Heroku apps create Barkwire node. Cool, good to go. And since Ember is an app, it has a full production build, all kinds of neat stuff. I also need to give it a build pack. Luckily, I have one right here. So if I go, yo, Heroku, make sure that I got the right build pack for this, and I do. So all I have to do now is git push Heroku master, and this guy is deploying. But not done yet. We have one more thing we have to do. When we click on these, we should be going to an individual dog. So the last thing we have to do on this, let's go back to our acceptance test and say, cool. So when I click on find dogs li-nth child 1's h3, I should be able to, the URL should change, and I should still see Charles Barkley, because Charles Barkley is the first dog. So the URL should probably look something a little bit more like that. And this isn't going to be dogs. It's going to be dog singular. There's no list items on that. But that should still read Charles Barkley. So let's take a look at the tests. All right, cool. Got a failing test. It's saying, hey, I clicked on this thing and nothing happened, man. So that's probably because, I go over to this, I need some kind of rowdy kind of thing to happen. So let's make another link to the dog route, and we're going to pass dog.id into that. And we'll say, it's the end of the link too. And it's saying, hey, you tried to do this, but there isn't a route named dog. That's another developer ergonomics thing. It's trying to help me out this whole time, saying like, giving me very useful errors. I'm not getting any kind of like those errors that you get in PHP, where it's just barking at you the whole time. All right, so I'll say, hey, give me a route named dog. Go over to my router and say, hey, I got this cool dog route, but I need path, and that should be dogs, dog ID. Do I have an error now? Cool, now it's saying, hey, everything works. I just don't see the thing you're looking for there. So now I can go to the dog route that I made, reuse some of the logic that I used there and say, give me this store, find record dog. And I need the URL parameters. So I'll say just parameters.dog ID, that thing I just put in. So now that model should be available. And if I go to the dog template that I made, I should be able to use that cool reusable component that I made a second ago. Say this is a dog. This is a dog listing. And I want to set the dog property of the dog listing equal to the model that I generated for this. And do I have Charles Barkley? By Jove, I do. So now, if I click on these, goes to the thing. It's exactly what I wanted. So I'll say, cool, it works, git push Heroku master. So what do we do here? We generated a bunch of app boilerplate. We wrote tests. We used add-ons for SAS, CSS reset. I didn't use fastboot, but fastboot is a thing that is one command away from being able to server-side render the HTML for the thing that you're trying to get, and then hydrate that with the app as it becomes available for faster load times. We refactored in a tight feedback loop. I could see what I was doing the entire time. I didn't have to wire any of that shit up myself, or worse, go without it. And we made reusable components. We let Ember data do all the heavy lifting on our APIs. I didn't have to write a handler for one dog versus many dogs. I just said, hey, my API is here, and if I look for, figure it out, man. I'm doing it the standard way. And I deployed a production build. That's minified, all the cruft out. It's 3 files. They're gzipped, all that kind of stuff. So the results are, I have a tested app. It's deployed. I have a cool dev environment that's an NPM install away from you using yourself. I have a production build, I have an abstracted data layer, and it's all in a standard format. So when I hired David Baker to help me work on this thing, he already knows where everything is. So that is how you build an Ember app. And if you go to the URL, barkwire-no.heroku app. It's done, motherfuckers. We'll do questions later. Well, I'll let Michael's meet up.
We're going to do questions, but also if you need to take a little break and grab another beery, do that as well. But yeah, let's do quick questions.
Okay.
Beery, questions.
Oh.
Yeah, make sure to repeat the questions.
All right, James, what do you want to know, baby? Uh-huh. Yes.
Things like that. And I think that if you are a mid or senior developer, you understand the way things should be done.
Yes.
It brings a lot of pros to doing development. You have a tested app ready to go.
Yep.
As a junior or someone who has 2, 3, 5 years experience, right? It feels like you're forcing someone to do something the right way.
Mm-hmm.
How do you sell junior devs
Sure.
to new people coming in on Ember? When
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things get shit ready for production, get things ready to go that aren't tested.
Yes.
There's still cool features.
Yes. So the question was, how do you get your juniors on board with something that pretty obviously assumes some knowledge of how to build this kind of thing? And what I'll say is that the learning curve on Ember is steep as shit. There's a lot of stuff that you have to know, and unlike a lot of the component-only frameworks, you can't get much done unless you understand a lot of pieces of Ember. That's kind of a cost of doing business thing. However, once you understand those, you get all the productivity gains. I've advised to a lot of people in this room who are like, how do I learn architecture? How do I get better? Invest the time into learning Ember. A lot of the patterns in this are not Ember special things. This component-based architecture, nested components, their approach to routing. Fuck, even the Angular CLI is literally a fork of Ember CLI. If you want to learn this stuff, this is a terrific learning tool to make you a better React developer, make you a better Angular developer. And so yeah, it is a ton of investment up front, but I think that that's the benefit.
So follow up real quick. So when you see React and Vue and even Angular 4 coming through, that are saying hey, we give you the opportunity to pull in what you want to win and structure things differently.
Yes.
What's my benefit of learning learning Ember as a junior dev?
Sure.
My teach me how to build apps in the correct way.
Yes.
Does that necessarily get you ready for the marketplace in React
So question was, does learning Ember get you ready for, as a junior, get you ready for a marketplace where like the other frameworks will give you a lot more leeway on how to do stuff? And I think that like that's the exact reason that you want to do something like this. All of the freedom that you get with a lot of the other frameworks can also be characterized as what Douglas Crockford called foot guns. So like it's a lot of like rope to wrap around your neck and hang yourself with. If you write something that doesn't make any sense in Ember, your shit won't compile. And so like when I was learning Ember, I was still pretty young in like my architecture days. And like I learned a lot of good things where like every time I felt like I was working against the framework, that was the signal to me that I was doing something that didn't make any sense. And so that was an alert to spend the time to learn to do it the right way. And like every once in a while, I'll write an Angular app. I've written in other frameworks, and you can write better in those because it's training into your bones a sane way to build apps. Also, I didn't mention it at all, but the Ember community does have a thing that's a direct one-to-one comparison to React Vue. It's called Glimmer. So like that component that I generated, you can get just the component piece of Ember and then grow from there into the entire framework. And that's a lot of what we're going to be seeing in the Ember community in the next year or so. All right, give me 2 more questions. Yeah.
Stop the side conversations. Hey guys, bring it down. Bring it down.
Thank you. 2 more questions.
Why was the production build size 51 megabytes?
Okay, so the production build size is because it's using all of those things to, all those libraries to generate the stuff. The delivery size isn't 57 megabytes. The delivery size is on the large side. However, the way that it grows, I said in the beginning, it's for ambitious web applications. If you want to make a to-do app, it'll be the biggest fucking to-do app you've ever seen. However, as you add route after route after route and component after component after component, so many of those pieces get reused that a full-size production Ember app versus a full-size React Redux or Angular becomes incredibly competitive. But there's a ton of libraries that go into making that build and doing things like generating the server-side rendered hydration kind of stuff. All those kinds of things end up for a huge slug on your thing, but it's not necessarily a huge delivery for your app. All right, cool. One more question. One more. Anybody? Going once? Yeah.
So, in this, you made a request to the API to get data from it. How would you post to it?
Okay, great question. So the question was, how do I post to an API? Pretty straightforward to get it. So since Ember knows the URL of my API, and the API is conventional, what that same way that I said, hey, this.store.find record or find all, I can also do things like this.store create record, and then I can make something that I can call a save method on, and that will generate a post request to the same API following the same kinds of conventions. And like, so Ember is convention over configuration. That doesn't mean no configuration. Let's say I have an API that I have no control over. It's got some wonky format to it. I can override all of these things, but its default assumption is that you're working with something that's kind of sane. All right, cool. Anybody has any other Ember questions? I'm hanging out here for a little bit. How about we move on to the next presentation? Mr. Michael Herman.